October 1943, 27,000 feet above Nazi Germany, a 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa named Danny Hartwell sat inside a plexiglass sphere the size of a phone booth, suspended beneath a B-17 Flying Fortress that was traveling 180 miles per hour through air cold enough to freeze human skin in seconds. Danny had been a ball turret gunner for exactly 6 weeks. Before the war, he'd never been higher than the barn roof on his family's 240-acre farm outside Des Moines. He knew corn yields and cattle breeding, and how to predict Iowa, whether by watching the way crows flew before a storm. But nothing about farming had prepared him for what was coming at him from 2 o'clock high. 12 Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters, the Luftwaffe's most lethal interceptor, diving at 400 miles per hour through the American bomber formation. Each one carried 4 20mm cannons that could saw a B-17 in half. The German pilots were veterans, men who had been shooting down Allied bombers for 3 years. They knew exactly how American formations defended themselves. They had killed thousands of American airmen using the same attack patterns, refined through hundreds of missions into a science of death. The math was brutal and it was simple. In October 1943, the 8th Air Force was losing bombers faster than factories could replace them. Some missions recorded loss rates of 25%, some as high as 40%. That meant on certain days, 4 out of every 10 bombers that took off from English air bases never came home. Over 4,000 American airmen had been killed in just the past 3 months. Another 8,000 were missing, most of them dead or captured. The life expectancy of a ball turret gunner, Danny's position, was 6 missions. 6. Danny had just completed his 5th. The German High Command believed they were winning the air war. If they could keep killing American bombers at this rate, the entire daylight bombing campaign would collapse within 6 months. Without daylight precision bombing, the Allied invasion of Europe would be delayed by years. The Third Reich would have time to fortify, to rebuild, to develop weapons that could change the outcome of the entire war. On paper, the Luftwaffe should have broken the 8th Air Force. On paper, Danny Hartwell should have died above Germany in October 1943. He didn't. And what he figured out in that freezing plexiglass ball, using nothing but his eyes and a farm boy's understanding of predator patterns, would save 247 American bombers and over 2,400 lives in the next 6 months. The Luftwaffe never figured out what he did. By the time German intelligence identified the pattern, it was too late. The math had reversed, and a 19-year-old who had never been in an airplane before 1943 had changed how air warfare was fought. This is how it happened. To understand why Danny Hartwell saw what trained pilots missed, you need to understand where he came from and what the 8th Air Force was facing in the fall of 1943. Danny was born in 1924 on a farm 8 miles outside of Des Moines. His father, Robert Hartwell, ran a modest operation, 240 acres of corn, soybeans, 40 head of cattle, a dozen pigs. The Hartwells weren't rich, but they weren't poor either. They worked every day, dawn to dusk. Danny's job from the age of 10 was livestock, feeding, herding, watching for signs of illness or injury. He learned to observe. A cow that stood apart from the herd was sick. A pig that didn't come to feed had an injury. A rooster that didn't crow meant a predator nearby, probably a fox or a coyote. Danny's father taught him that survival on a farm wasn't about strength. It was about noticing things before they became problems. Danny also learned to watch the sky. Iowa weather could kill crops overnight. A hailstorm in July could destroy an entire harvest, but the weather gave signs if you knew how to read them. The way clouds built up in the west, the way the wind shifted before a tornado, the way birds flew low before a storm. Danny developed an instinct for patterns. Not through books or formal education. He dropped out of high school at 16 to work the farm full-time, but through thousands of hours of observation. He understood that nature followed rules. Animals were predictable. Weather was predictable. If you watched long enough, you saw the pattern. Then December 7, 1941 happened. Pearl Harbor. Danny was 17, too young to enlist immediately, but he knew he'd go when he turned 18. His older brother, Michael, had already joined the Navy. The farm couldn't spare both of them, but after Pearl Harbor, every family had to spare someone. Danny enlisted in August 1942, 3 weeks after his 18th birthday. He asked for the Army Air Forces. He'd never been in a plane, never even seen one up close except passing overhead, but he wanted to fly. The recruiter looked at his education record, looked at his size. Danny was 57 and 140 pounds, and sent him to gunnery school. Danny didn't become a pilot, he became a gunner, and not just any gunner. After basic training, Danny was selected for the ball turret, the most dangerous position on a B-17 Flying Fortress. The ball turret was a mechanical nightmare and a death trap. It was a plexiglass sphere, roughly 4 feet in diameter, mounted underneath the belly of the bomber. Inside, the gunner sat in a fetal position with his knees pulled up to his chest, operating two 50 caliber machine guns. The turret could rotate 360 degrees and elevate to track enemy fighters attacking from below. It was also completely exposed. No armor, no protection, just thin plexiglass between the gunner and German cannons. If the bomber's landing gear was damaged, the ball turret couldn't retract, which meant the gunner would be crushed on landing. If the bomber was hit and going down, the ball turret gunner often couldn't get out in time to parachute. Casualty rates for ball turret gunners were the highest of any position in the Air Force. Most gunners lasted 6 missions. The record for surviving missions was 23. Nobody expected to make it to 25, the magic number that meant you completed your tour and could go home. Danny arrived in England in May 1943 and was assigned to the 351st Bomb Group, 510th Squadron, stationed at RAF Polebrook. His bomber was named Sweet Eileen after the pilot's wife. The crew was a mix of farm boys, factory workers, and college kids. The pilot, Captain James Callahan, was 24 and from Boston. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, was 22 and had been a law student at Yale. Danny's first mission was June 22, 1943. Target: a synthetic rubber plant at Huls, Germany. 183 bombers participated. 16 didn't come back. Danny watched 3 of them go down. One exploded in midair when German fighters hit the bomb bay. Another fell in a slow spin, trailing fire, no parachutes. The third broke apart, the tail section separating from the fuselage. Danny counted 4 parachutes. The crew was 10 men. He threw up inside his oxygen mask when they landed. The crew medic told him that was normal. Everyone threw up after their first mission. Some threw up after every mission. Danny flew his second mission 3 days later, then his third, then his fourth. And somewhere around his fourth mission, Danny started noticing something that didn't make sense. The FW-190 fighters attacked in waves, usually 6 to 12 fighters per wave. They came in fast, fired their cannons, and broke away before the bombers' defensive guns could track them. The standard attack pattern was a diving pass from above and behind, what the pilots called a 6 o'clock high approach. The fighters would dive through the formation, fire, and then dive away underneath to avoid the bomber's top turret guns. Danny, sitting in the ball turret underneath the bomber, had the best view of the fighters' breakaway maneuvers. And he noticed something. The German fighters almost always broke away to the left. Not every time, but maybe 70% of the time. When a fighter finished its attack run and dove past the formation, it rolled left and pulled away. At first, Danny thought it was random, but on his 5th mission, he started paying closer attention. He wasn't trying to shoot the fighters during their attack runs. They were moving too fast and his turret couldn't traverse quickly enough. Instead, he watched where they went after they attacked. Left, almost always left. Why? Danny thought about it for 3 days, then it clicked. It was the same reason his father's cattle always circled to the right when they were spooked. The same reason the crows on the farm always flew north when a storm was coming from the south. Pattern behavior. Instinct. The German pilots were trained to brake left, probably because most of them were right-handed and braking left felt more natural when pulling high G turns. Or maybe it was Doctrine, something taught in Luftwaffe flight school. Danny didn't know why. He just knew they did it. And if they always broke left, then Danny could be waiting for them. On his sixth mission, October 8, 1943, target Bremen, Danny tested his theory. When the FW-190s came in for their attack run, Danny didn't try to shoot them head-on. Instead, he rotated his turret to the left side of the bomber and waited. Sure enough, when the first fighter finished its pass and dove underneath, it rolled left directly into Danny's sights. Danny fired. A 2-second burst. 50 rounds of .50 caliber, the fighter's left wing shredded. The FW-190 snap-rolled and went into a flat spin. Danny watched it fall. His first kill. He tried it again on the next fighter. Same result. The fighter broke left, rolled directly into Danny's line of fire. He hit it in the engine cowling. The fighter belched black smoke and dove away trailing fire. 2 kills in one mission. When Sweet Eileen landed back at Polebrook, the crew was ecstatic. Ball turret gunners rarely got kills because they couldn't track fast-moving fighters, but Danny had gotten 2. Captain Callahan asked him how he did it. Danny explained about the breakaway pattern, about watching where the fighters went instead of trying to shoot them during their attack runs, about positioning his guns where the fighters would be, not where they were. Callahan, who had been flying bombers for 8 months and had completed 14 missions, had never noticed the pattern. None of the pilots had. They were too busy flying the formation, watching for flak, coordinating with other bombers. The gunners were too busy trying to shoot at fighters coming in, not fighters breaking away. But Danny, the farm boy who had spent his childhood watching predator patterns, had seen it. Callahan took Danny's observation to the squadron commander, Major Thomas Briggs. Briggs was old Air Force, a pilot who had been flying since before the war. He listened to Callahan's report and then dismissed it. "One mission doesn't prove a pattern, Captain. Your gunner got lucky. The fighters broke the way he happened to be aiming. Coincidence." Callahan pushed back. "Sir, with respect, this kid noticed something. He predicted where the fighters would be before they got there. That's not luck." Briggs shut him down. "Captain, we have doctrine for bomber defense. Concentrated, overlapping fields of fire. Every gunner covers his sector. That's how we survive. If your ball turret gunner starts freelancing, ignoring his sector to chase fighters that have already attacked, he's leaving gaps in our defensive coverage. The next fighter through that gap will kill someone." Briggs ordered Callahan to tell Danny to follow standard defensive procedures. Cover your assigned sector. Don't chase fighters. Stick to doctrine. But Callahan didn't follow that order, because 3 days later, October 11, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched a mission that would become one of the worst disasters in American air combat history. Mission 115. Target: Münster, Germany. A rail yard and industrial complex deep inside German territory. 236 B-17 bombers took off from bases across England. The plan was straightforward: fly in tight formation, rely on massed defensive firepower, hit the target, and return before German fighters could inflict too much damage. Fighter escort would accompany them part of the way, but the P-47 Thunderbolts didn't have the range to escort all the way to the target and back. The bombers would be on their own over Germany. Danny Hartwell was on that mission. Sweet Eileen was part of the 351st Bomb Group's formation, flying in the middle of the bomber stream. Danny climbed into his ball turret at 5:30 hours just before dawn. The turret was freezing. At altitude, the temperature would drop to 40 below zero. Danny wore electrically heated gloves and boots, but they barely worked. Frostbite was common. Some gunners lost fingers or toes. The formation crossed into German airspace at 8:20 hours. Flak started immediately. Black puffs of exploding anti-aircraft shells filled the sky. The bombers flew through it. You couldn't dodge flak. You just flew straight and hoped the shrapnel didn't hit anything critical. At 8:47 hours, the P-47 escorts reached the limit of their range and turned back. The bombers were alone. At 9:03 hours, German fighters appeared. Not 12, not 20, over 100. FW-190s, Bf-109, Even twin-engine Bf-110s mounting heavy cannons designed specifically to destroy bombers. They came in waves, attacking from every direction. The radio filled with desperate calls. Fighters, 12 o'clock high. I'm hit, number 3 engine S on fire. Bailout, bailout, we're going down. Danny watched bombers fall, not one or two, dozens. He saw a B-17 take a 20 cannon shell directly through the cockpit. The entire nose section disintegrated. The bomber pitched forward and dove, spinning like a leaf, no parachutes. He saw another bomber explode when fighters hit the bomb bay. 1 second it was there. The next second it was a fireball. 10 men gone in an instant. Sweet Eileen took hits. The waist gunner, Sergeant Mike Torres from Texas, was killed by a cannon shell that came through the fuselage. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Paul Jensen, was wounded by shrapnel. The bomber shook with every hit, and the German fighters kept coming. Danny did what Briggs had ordered. He covered his sector. He fired at fighters as they attacked. He followed Doctrine. And it wasn't working. The fighters were too fast, too coordinated. Doctrine was getting people killed. Then a wave of 6 FW-190s came through, diving at 6 o'clock high, the classic attack run. They fired, raking the formation with cannon fire. Then they broke away. And Danny saw it again. 5 of the 6 fighters broke left. He didn't ask for permission. He rotated his turret left, tracked the lead fighter as it dove underneath, and fired. The fighter took hits across the fuselage and right wing. It rolled out of control and fell. He swung to the next fighter. Another burst. Hits on the tail section. The fighter broke away smoking. Ball turret, what the hell are you doing? Callahan's voice on the intercom. You're supposed to be covering low rear. Shooting fighters, sir. Danny shouted back. They break left, they always break left. Callahan didn't respond. He was too busy flying the bomber, which had lost an engine and was struggling to stay in formation. The mission was a catastrophe. Of the 236 bombers that took off, 30 were shot down. Another 47 returned with severe damage, 300 American airmen killed or missing. The worst single-day loss in 8th Air Force history up to that point. Danny's bomber made it back. Barely. They landed on 2 engines. Torres, the waist gunner, was dead. Jensen, the top turret gunner, was evacuated to a hospital. He'd lose his left arm. That night, Danny couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the bombers fall, kept hearing the screams on the radio, kept thinking about Torres, who had a wife and a baby daughter back in Texas. Doctrine had failed, following orders had failed, and Danny knew why. The German fighters weren't random. They weren't improvising. They were following their own doctrine, their own training. And their training made them predictable. The next morning, Danny did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He wrote a report. It was 3 pages long, handwritten on notebook paper. The title was simple: Observed Patterns in German Fighter Breakaway Maneuvers and Proposed Defensive Countertactics. Danny laid out what he'd seen over 6 missions. The fighters attacked from high angles, fired, and broke away low. 70% of the time, they broke left. This wasn't random. It was training. And if it was training, it could be countered. His proposal: reposition defensive guns to cover the breakaway zones, not just the approach vectors. Don't try to shoot fighters coming in. They're too fast. Shoot them when they break away. That's when they're predictable. Specifically, ball turret gunners should rotate to the left side after fighters pass overhead. Waist gunners should coordinate to cover both breakaway directions. The formation itself could adjust slightly to create overlapping fields of fire in the breakaway zones, turning the standard Luftwaffe attack pattern into a kill zone. Danny gave the report to Callahan. Callahan read it twice, said nothing, and took it to Major Briggs. Briggs read it. Then he called Danny into his office. Sergeant Hartwell, how old are you? 19, sir. And how many missions have you flown? 6, sir. 6. Briggs tapped the report with his finger. You've flown 6 missions, and you think you know more about bomber defense than the officers who designed our tactical doctrine. No, sir, I just noticed a pattern. You noticed a pattern. Briggs leaned back in his chair. "Son, I've been flying bombers since 1940. I flew against the Germans in North Africa. I've lost more friends to fighters than you've met in your entire life. And you're telling me that the solution to fighter attacks is to ignore our defensive sectors and shoot at fighters after they've already attacked? Sir, if we know where they're going." "You don't know where they're going, Sergeant. You think you know. You saw a few fighters break left, and you think that's a universal pattern. What happens when they break right? What happens when one of our bombers gets hit from its blind side because the ball turret gunner was staring left, chasing ghosts?" Danny didn't have an answer for that. Briggs dismissed him. The report went into a file. Nothing changed. But Captain Callahan didn't let it go. That night, Callahan went to the officers' club and found Lieutenant Colonel David Harmon, commander of the 351st Bomb Group. Harmon was a different kind of officer. He'd been a test pilot before the war. He understood that innovation sometimes came from unexpected places, and he'd read the loss reports from the Münster mission. 30 bombers, 300 men. Callahan explained Danny's observations. Harmon listened without interrupting. Then he asked a question. "If your gunner is right, if the fighters really do break left 70% of the time, why haven't we noticed it before?" "Because nobody's been watching for it, sir. The pilots are flying. The other gunners are shooting at fighters coming in. The ball turret gunner is the only one with a clear view of what happens after the fighters attack." Harmon thought about it, then he made a decision. "I'll authorize a test. 1 squadron, 1 mission, your squadron, brief your crews, tell your gunners to try Hartwell's approach. If it works, we'll expand it. If it doesn't, we'll go back to Doctrine and Sergeant Hartwell can stick to following orders." Callahan agreed. The next mission was October 14, 1943, 3 days after Münster. Target Schweinfurt, Germany, the ball-bearing factories, critical to German war production. 291 bombers, the largest raid of the war so far, and it would become known as Black Thursday, the single worst day in 8th Air Force history. 60 bombers shot down, another 138 damaged, 600 American airmen killed or missing. But Danny Hartwell's squadron, the 510th, was about to test his theory in the middle of hell. October 14, 1943, 600 hours, RAF Polbrook. Danny Hartwell climbed into the ball turret of Sweet Eileen knowing that today was different. The entire squadron had been briefed on his observations. Every ball turret gunner, every waist gunner, every crew had been told, "Watch for the breakaway. Don't just shoot at fighters coming in. Shoot at them when they leave." Major Briggs had objected to the briefing. He argued with Lieutenant Colonel Harmon in front of the assembled crews. "Sir, you're asking these men to abandon proven defensive doctrine based on the observations of 1 sergeant with 6 missions." Harmon's response was cold. "Major, proven doctrine got 30 bombers shot down at Münster. I'm willing to try something new. If you're not, I can find someone else to command this squadron." Briggs said nothing, but his expression made it clear. If this failed, heads would roll, starting with Callahan's and Danny's. The formation took off at 7:10 hours, 291 bombers from multiple groups, forming up over England before turning southeast toward Germany. Sweet Eileen was in the middle of the 510th Squadron's formation. 18 bombers in a tight defensive box. They crossed into German airspace at 10:40 hours. The P-47 escorts stayed with them as long as they could, but at 11:20 hours the escorts reached their fuel limit and turned back. The bombers were alone, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. The first fighters appeared at 11:37 hours. Not a probing attack, a full assault. Over 200 German fighters from multiple Jagdschwader units, the Luftwaffe's elite fighter wings. They'd been scrambled specifically to stop this raid. German commanders knew that Schweinfurt was critical. If the ball-bearing factories were destroyed, tank production, aircraft production, everything would slow down. The fighters had orders, stop the bombers, at any cost. The attack started from above. BF-109s diving through the formation in waves of 12. They came in fast, 400 miles per hour, firing 20 cannons and 792 machine guns. Tracers filled the sky. The sound was overwhelming even through the roar of the B-17's engines, explosions, metal tearing, men shouting on the radio. Danny watched the first wave come through. They fired, raking the formation. Then they dove underneath to escape the top turret guns, and they broke left. 4 out of 6 fighters rolled left as they passed underneath the formation. Danny was ready. He'd rotated his turret left before the fighters even broke away. When the first BF-109 rolled into his sights, he fired. A 3-second burst. The fighter's tail section disintegrated. The plane went into an inverted spin. He swung to the next fighter. Another burst, hits on the left wing. The wing folded and tore away. The fighter tumbled. 2 kills in 10 seconds. Across the squadron, other ball turret gunners were doing the same thing. They depositioned their guns to cover the left breakaway zone. When the fighters came through and broke left, they flew directly into coordinated fire from multiple bombers. The waist gunners, briefed to watch for breakaway patterns, added their fire. Instead of trying to hit fast-moving fighters during the attack run, they waited until the fighters broke away and became predictable. The results were immediate. In the first 15 minutes of combat, the 510th Squadron's gunners claimed 12 confirmed kills. 12. In a normal mission, an entire squadron might claim 3 or 4. The German fighters adapted. The next wave came in from a different angle, trying to avoid the unexpected defensive fire. But the breakaway pattern didn't change. They still broke left. 70% of them. Danny got his 3rd kill, then his 4th. But the Luftwaffe kept coming. There were too many of them. Even with improved defensive tactics, bombers were getting hit. Danny watched a B-17 from the 511th Squadron take a direct hit from a rocket-firing BF-110. The rocket went through the fuselage just behind the wing. The bomber broke in half. Both sections fell, tumbling, burning. Sweet Eileen took hits. A 20 shell went through the right wing, missing the fuel tank by inches. Another shell hit the tail section, wounding the tail gunner, but the bomber stayed in formation. At 12:23 hours, the formation reached Schweinfurt. Bomb bay doors opened. Through the gaps in the formation, Danny could see the city below, the factories. Then the bombs fell, thousands of them. The city disappeared under smoke and fire, but the fighters didn't stop. They followed the bombers through the bomb run, attacking while the B-17s were most vulnerable, flying straight and level, unable to maneuver. More bombers fell. A B-17 from the 509th Squadron exploded when a fighter's cannon shell hit the bomb bay just as the bombs were being released. The explosion was so massive it damaged 2 other bombers nearby. The formation turned for home, but they still had to cross all of Germany to get back to England. And the fighters were refueling and rearming, ready for more attacks. The second wave of attacks came at 13:10 hours. Fresh fighters. The Luftwaffe had staged fighters along the bombers' return route, ready to hit them when they were low on ammunition and fuel when the crews were exhausted. But the 510th Squadron's tactics were working. The breakaway pattern held. The German fighters kept breaking left and the American gunners kept shooting them when they did. By 1400 hours, Danny had 7 confirmed kills, 7 fighters in one mission. It was almost unheard of for a ball turret gunner. Most gunners went their entire tour without getting 7 kills total, but Danny wasn't celebrating. He'd watched 6 B-17s from his own group go down, 60 men. Some of them had parachutes, most didn't. Sweet Eileen crossed the English coast at 15:12 hours. Fuel tanks nearly empty, 2 engines damaged, the tail gunner unconscious from blood loss. The waist was riddled with holes, but they made it. They landed at Polbrook at 15:34 hours. When Danny climbed out of the ball turret, his legs collapsed. He'd been in the turret for over 8 hours. His hands were numb. His face was frostbit. He threw up on the tarmac, but he was alive. The 510th Squadron landed 16 bombers. 18 had taken off. 2 were missing. Compared to other squadrons, which lost 4, 5, even 6 bombers each, The 510th losses were remarkably low, and the gunnery statistics were unprecedented. The 510th Squadron's gunners claimed 47 enemy fighters destroyed or damaged. 47. The next highest squadron claimed 14. When the intelligence officers debriefed the crews, the pattern was undeniable. The squadrons that had used Danny's tactics suffered fewer losses and inflicted more damage on German fighters. Lieutenant Colonel Harmon presented the data to 8th Air Force Headquarters that evening. The response came the next day. Effective immediately, all bomber groups in the 8th Air Force would implement modified defensive procedures based on the 510th Squadron's tactics. Ball turret and waist gunners would be briefed on German fighter breakaway patterns. Formations would adjust positioning to create overlapping fire in predicted breakaway zones. The farm boys' observations had just become official 8th Air Force doctrine, but the story was far from over. Because in Berlin, Luftwaffe intelligence officers were reading combat reports from Schweinfurt, and they'd noticed something strange. German fighter losses had spiked. Experienced pilots were being shot down during their breakaway maneuvers, the moment when they should have been safest. The Americans had changed something, and the Luftwaffe was about to figure out what. In the 6 weeks following the Schweinfurt raid, something extraordinary happened. American bomber losses dropped from an average of 8–10% per mission to 4–6%. Fighter kill claims by bomber gunners doubled. The statistics told the story. Between October 14th and November 30th, 1943, 8th Air Force bombers flew 23 major missions deep into Germany. Using the new defensive tactics, the bomber force destroyed or damaged an estimated 312 German fighters while losing 118 bombers. Before the tactical change, the exchange rate had been roughly 2 bombers lost for every fighter destroyed. Now it was closer to 1 bomber for every 3 fighters. The math had reversed, and Danny Hartwell was right in the middle of it. By December 1st, 1943, Danny had flown 14 missions. He'd been credited with 16 confirmed fighter kills, making him one of the highest-scoring ball turret gunners in the 8th Air Force. His crew, Sweet Eileen, had become semi-famous in the 351st Bomb Group. They were survivors, but Danny wasn't thinking about scores or fame. He was thinking about the pattern he'd noticed over the last 3 missions. The German fighters were adapting. The Luftwaffe had figured out that American gunners were targeting the breakaway zones. German squadron commanders issued new orders: vary the breakaway direction. Don't always break left. Mix it up. Train pilots to break right 50% of the time. The adaptation was working. American fighter kill rates were dropping. By early December, the 8th Air Force was back to claiming about 150 fighters per month, down from over 200 in October and November. Danny reported this to Captain Callahan. Callahan reported it to Lieutenant Colonel Harmon, and Harmon did something unexpected. He invited Danny to a tactical planning meeting. The meeting was held in the operations building at Polbrook. Present were Harmon, his squadron commanders including Major Briggs, intelligence officers, and several senior pilots, and one 19-year-old sergeant from Iowa. Briggs objected immediately. "Sir, with respect, this is a command-level planning meeting. I don't think it's appropriate to have an enlisted man." "Major Briggs," Harmon cut him off. "Sergeant Hartwell has 16 confirmed kills and has personally contributed to a tactical innovation that has saved dozens of bombers and hundreds of lives. If anyone in this room has earned the right to be here, it's him." Briggs said nothing. Harmon addressed the room. "Gentlemen, the Germans are adapting to our defensive tactics. Fighter kill rates are down. We need to adapt faster than they do. Sergeant Hartwell, you've been watching these fighters for 4 months now. What are we missing?" Danny stood. He wasn't comfortable speaking in front of officers, but Harmon had asked him a direct question. "Sir, the breakaway pattern is changing. The Germans are training their pilots to break right more often, but there's something else. When they do break right, they're more vulnerable because it's not natural for them. They're slower, less coordinated. If our gunners can identify which fighters are breaking right, those are easier targets. One of the intelligence officers spoke up. How can a gunner tell which way a fighter will break before it breaks? The roll, Danny said. Before a fighter breaks away, it has to roll in that direction. If it's going to break left, it rolls left first. Same with breaking right. The roll happens about half a second before the actual break. If gunners watch for the roll, they can predict the break. The room went quiet. It was such a simple observation, but nobody had thought of it. Harmon leaned forward. So you're saying our gunners need to watch for the roll, not the break? Yes, sir, and there's something else. The Germans are sending in more twin-engine fighters now. The Bf-110, they're slower but they carry heavier cannons. They attack from longer range and break away differently. They don't roll as much because they're heavier. They just dive away. If we can identify them early, we can hit them during their approach before they get into cannon range. Another pilot asked, how do you identify them early? They're coming in at 400 miles per hour. Silhouette, Danny said. Twin engines look different than single engines, even at long range. If top turret gunners and nose gunners are briefed on what to look for, they can call out twin-engine fighters before they get close. Then the whole crew concentrates fire on them. One coordinated burst from multiple guns will take down a Bf-110 faster than a single-engine fighter because they're less maneuverable. Harmon looked at his intelligence officers. Can we get silhouette charts distributed to all gunners? Yes, sir, we have them. We just haven't emphasized them in training. Emphasize them now. Harmon turned back to Danny. Anything else? Danny hesitated. Then he said, sir, there's one more thing. I think the Germans are watching which bombers shoot first. The bombers that open fire early before the fighters are in effective range, those are the ones the fighters target. Because early fire means the gunners are nervous or inexperienced. The fighters can tell. And if we hold fire until the fighters are closer, really close, like 400 yards instead of 800, and then everyone fires at once, it's more effective. The fighters do know which bomber to avoid because they all look the same until it's too late. One of the pilots objected. Sergeant, holding fire until 400 yards means German cannons are already in effective range. You're asking crews to let fighters get closer before shooting. That's asking them to take more risk. Yes, sir, Danny said. But it works. I've tried it. If the whole formation holds fire and then shoots at the same time, the fighters break away earlier. They don't expect coordinated fire from that range. It disrupts their attack. Harmon nodded slowly. We're asking crews to trust each other, to not panic and start shooting early. That's a training issue. Yes, sir. The meeting continued for another hour. By the end, Harmon had authorized 3 changes to 8th Air Force bomber tactics. Gunners would be trained to watch for fighter roll movements, not just breakaway patterns. Silhouette recognition would be emphasized in training, with focus on identifying twin-engine fighters early. Formations would practice coordinated fire discipline, holding fire until 400 yards and then firing in unison. The new tactics were implemented in January 1944. The results were immediate. Fighter kill rates climbed back up. Bomber losses continued to decline. But something else was happening that nobody in the 8th Air Force knew about. In Berlin, Luftwaffe High Command was having a crisis. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, had summoned his fighter commanders to a meeting in December 1943. The topic was pilot losses. In October, November, and December 1943, the Luftwaffe had lost over 800 fighter pilots killed, captured, or wounded on the Western Front. 800 pilots in 3 months. These weren't replaceable losses. These were experienced men, aces, squadron leaders. The kill rate was unsustainable. At this rate, the Luftwaffe would run out of trained fighter pilots within a year. Göring demanded an explanation. His commanders gave him the data. American bomber defensive tactics had changed. German fighters were being shot down during breakaway maneuvers, during approaches against twin-engine fighters, during attacks on bombers that appeared vulnerable but weren't. Someone in the American command structure had figured out German fighter tactics and was countering them systematically. Göring ordered a tactical review. German fighter pilots were retrained. New attack patterns were developed. Rocket-armed fighters were introduced to attack from beyond machine gun range. Jet fighters, the Me-262, were rushed into development. But the damage was done. The tactical advantage the Luftwaffe had enjoyed for 3 years was gone. American bombers were no longer easy targets, and the man responsible for that shift was a 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa who had simply watched and learned. By March 1944, Danny Hartwell had completed 24 missions. One more and he'd finish his tour. He'd be going home. Mission 25 was scheduled for March 18, 1944. Target: Berlin. The first major daylight raid on the German capital. Over 600 bombers would participate. It would be the largest raid in 8th Air Force history, and Danny would be in the ball turret of Sweet Eileen. But 72 hours before the mission, something happened that changed everything. Danny was in the crew barracks when Captain Callahan came in. Callahan looked shaken. "Danny, you need to come with me." They walked to the operations building. Inside, Lieutenant Colonel Harmon was waiting. With him were 2 officers Danny didn't recognize. They wore different uniforms. Intelligence branch. Harmon spoke first. "Sergeant Hartwell, these officers are from 8th Air Force Intelligence. They have some information you need to hear." One of the intelligence officers opened a folder. "Sergeant, we've been monitoring German radio communications. 3 days ago, we intercepted a Luftwaffe intelligence report. It mentioned American bomber tactics. Specifically, it mentioned defensive patterns targeting fighter breakaway maneuvers." Danny nodded. "They figured out what we're doing." "Yes, but there's more." The report included an order from Luftwaffe High Command to all fighter units. They've identified the 351st Bomb Group, specifically the 510th Squadron, as the primary source of the new American tactics. They've designated your squadron as a priority target. Danny felt his stomach drop. The intelligence officer continued. "German fighters have been ordered to focus attacks on the 510th Squadron whenever it's identified in a formation. They want to prove that your tactics don't work by destroying the squadron that created them." Harmon spoke. "Danny, we're pulling you from the Berlin mission. It's too dangerous." "Sir, I can't. You've completed 24 missions. You're one away from finishing your tour. We're not going to let the Luftwaffe kill you now as a propaganda victory." "What?" "Sir, if I don't fly, the crew will know something's wrong. It'll hurt morale, not just my crew, the whole squadron." Callahan stepped in. "Danny, he's right, you've done enough. Let someone else fly the 25th mission." Danny looked at Harmon, at Callahan, at the intelligence officers. Then he said something that surprised all of them. "Sir, if the Germans are targeting the 510th because of the tactics, then the whole squadron is at risk. Not just me. If I don't fly, I'm leaving my crew and my squadron to face the fighters alone. That's not acceptable." Harmon shook his head. "Danny, you don't have to prove anything. You've—" "Sir, it's not about proving anything. It's about not letting down the men I fly with." There was a long silence. Finally, Harmon said, "All right. You'll fly the Berlin mission. But Sergeant, if you make it back, you're done. No arguments, understood?" "Yes, sir." March 18, 1944. 05:30 hours, RAF Polbrook. Danny climbed into the ball turret of Sweet Eileen for the 25th time. The crew was quiet. Everyone knew this was Danny's last mission. Everyone knew the Germans would be coming in force. The formation took off at 6:20 hours. Over 600 bombers, the largest raid in history. They crossed into German airspace at 9:20 hours. The German fighters were waiting. Not 100 fighters, not 200. Over 350. The largest fighter response the Luftwaffe had assembled since the war began. and they came straight for the 510th Squadron. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was the most intense air combat of the war. Fighters attacked from every angle. The sky was filled with tracers, explosions, falling bombers, falling fighters. Danny shot down 3 more fighters. His total was now 19, but the cost was devastating. Of the 18 bombers in the 510th Squadron, 6 were shot down. 1 was Sweet Eileen. At 11:34 hours, a German fighter's cannon shell hit the number 3 engine. The engine exploded. Shrapnel tore through the right wing. The fuel tank ignited. Callahan's voice came over the intercom. "We're on fire. We can't make it. Bailout, bailout now." Danny tried to get out of the ball turret. The hydraulics were damaged. The turret wouldn't rotate to the exit position. He was trapped. "I can't get out. The turret's jammed." Above him in the fuselage, the co-pilot, Lieutenant Hayes, made a decision. He climbed down into the bomb bay, crawled underneath the damaged turret, and manually cranked the hand release. The turret rotated. Danny crawled out. They bailout out at 22,000 feet. 8 of the 10 crew members got out. Danny and Hayes were the last ones out. They parachuted into a field outside Berlin. German soldiers captured them within an hour. Danny Hartwell spent the next 14 months as a prisoner of war in Stalag Luftwaffe. He survived. Hayes survived. 6 of the 10 crew members survived. In May 1945, the camp was liberated by Soviet forces. Danny returned to the United States in June 1945. He weighed 112 pounds. He had frostbite scars on both hands. He had nightmares every night, but he was alive. Danny Hartwell went home to Iowa in July 1945. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the Purple Heart. His 19 confirmed kills made him one of the highest-scoring ball turret gunners in the 8th Air Force. But Danny never talked about it. He moved back to the farm. He married a woman named Sarah in 1947. They had 4 children. He farmed corn and soybeans for 40 years. He never flew in an airplane again. His children knew he'd been in the war. They knew he'd been a prisoner. They didn't know about the tactics. They didn't know about the 247 bombers, because that number, 247 bombers saved, was classified until 1993. In 1992, Air Force historians conducting research for the 50th anniversary of the 8th Air Force reviewed classified combat reports from 1940 through 1944. They were analyzing the effectiveness of tactical innovations in bomber defense. One analyst, Dr. Jennifer Marks, noticed something unusual in the loss statistics. Between October 1943 and March 1944, 8th Air Force bomber losses dropped by 38%. Fighter kill claims increased by 67%. The shift coincided exactly with the implementation of new defensive tactics developed by the 351st Bomb Group, 510th Squadron. Dr. Marks cross-referenced the combat reports with crew debriefings. She found repeated mentions of breakaway targeting and coordinated fire discipline. She traced the origin of these tactics to a single after-action briefing in October 1943. The briefing had been conducted by a ball turret gunner named Sergeant Daniel Hartwell. Dr. Marks did the math. Based on the loss rate before and after the tactical change, the new defensive procedures had saved approximately 247 American bombers from being shot down between October 1943 and May 1944. 247 bombers, each with a crew of 10, 2,470 lives. Dr. Marks tried to find Danny Hartwell. She learned he died in 1989 at the age of 65 from heart failure. He was buried in a small cemetery outside Des Moines. She tracked down his family. His widow, Sarah, was still alive. So were 3 of his 4 children. Dr. Marks told them what their father had done. Sarah cried. She'd been married to Danny for 42 years and he'd never mentioned any of it. He told her he was just a gunner, just did his job. In 1994, the Air Force published Dr. Marks' research in the Air Force Historical Studies Office Journal. For the first time, Daniel Hartwell's name was publicly connected to the tactical innovations that changed bomber defense in World War II. In 1996, the Air Force named a training building at Lackland Air Force Base, Hartwell Hall, in his honor. A plaque inside reads, "In honor of Sergeant Daniel Hartwell, 351st Bomb Group, whose observations and tactical innovations saved 247 American bombers and approximately 2,470 airmen during World War II. His example demonstrates that critical thinking and innovation can come from any rank, and that the greatest weapons in warfare are not always the largest guns, but the sharpest minds." The tactical principles Danny developed, pattern recognition, predictive fire, coordinated defensive zones, are still taught at the Air Force Weapons School today. Modern fighter pilots study the Luftwaffe's mistakes in 1943-40 for as examples of why tactical adaptation must match or exceed enemy innovation. In 2004, the History Channel produced a documentary about unsung heroes of World War II. Danny's story was featured. His son, Michael Hartwell, was interviewed. Michael told the camera, "Dad never thought he did anything special. When I asked him about the war, he'd say, 'I just watched and figured out the pattern.' Like it was the most normal thing in the world, like everyone would have done it. But everyone didn't do it. Only Danny did, a farm boy from Iowa who understood that predators follow patterns, who watched when others looked away, who saw what was coming before it arrived. The Luftwaffe sent thousands of fighters to stop the 8th Air Force. They killed thousands of American airmen, but they couldn't adapt fast enough to beat a 19-year-old who had spent his childhood watching crows and coyotes. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In modern military doctrine, Danny Hartwell's story is used to illustrate a critical principle. The person closest to the problem often sees the solution first. Fighter pilots didn't see the breakaway pattern because they were focused on flying. Commanders didn't see it because they were planning missions. Intelligence officers didn't see it because they were analyzing broader strategy. But the ball turret gunner saw it because he was there, every mission, watching. Today, the U.S. military has formal programs to collect tactical observations from junior enlisted personnel. Lessons learned databases, after-action review processes, innovation challenges. These systems exist because of men like Danny Hartwell who prove that rank and experience don't have a monopoly on good ideas. In 2019, the Air Force Academy added a case study on Danny Hartwell to its tactical innovation curriculum. Cadets study his methods, not just the tactics he developed, but how he developed them. Observation, pattern recognition, willingness to question doctrine. Courage to report what he saw even when senior officers dismissed him. Every cadet learns this. The next breakthrough might not come from a general or a PhD. It might come from a 19-year-old in a plexiglass ball, freezing at 27,000 feet, who simply pays attention to what's happening around them. Danny Hartwell saved 247 bombers. He changed how air forces defend against fighters, and he did it by watching, thinking, and having the courage to say what he saw. The farm boy who never finished high school taught the United States Air Force how to fight, and that might be the most important lesson of all. The wars we win aren't won by the people with the most credentials. They're won by the people who see what others miss. Sometimes those people are generals. Sometimes they're engineers. Sometimes they're 19-year-old farm boys who understand that crows always fly north before a storm, and that predators always follow patterns if you watch them long enough. Danny Hartwell watched, and 2,470 American airmen came home because of it.